Hello and welcome to Sunday Worship with St Catherine's, for St Catherine's and from St Catherine's, depending on whether you're with us at the moment, picking us up later, a member of our congregation or somebody else's, or just one of God's lovely people across the world. It's still the season of Easter, and today the Easter story takes us to the event when two of Jesus' disciples, leaving the city confused, befuddled, depressed, meet the risen Jesus on their way. They're having a long walk, and on their long walk they have a long talk with him. That story will unfold as we go through the service. At the end of that story, they finally recognize that it's Jesus they're meeting, and they recognize him, according to St Luke's account, in the breaking of bread. It's when they sit down to eat, and Jesus takes some bread to do the standard Jewish grace to go at the beginning of the meal. All of a sudden they think, that's Jesus. So since then, Christians have been in the habit of meeting over food, especially on the first day of the week and on Sunday. And I've been encouraging you to join in with me with a little bit of eating and drinking. Today I have chana dal, a spicy Indian snack which I'm rather fond of. So I'm going to be nibbling some chana dal and remembering how it is when we eat together with Jesus, that we meet him and we know him, and he joins us. He joins us in these everyday things. Please join me in our opening prayer.
The reading is taken from Luke chapter 24, verses 13 to 29. Now there came same day 2 of them were going to the village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about everything that had happened. As they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them, but they were kept from recognizing him. He asked them, "What are you discussing together as you walk along?" They stood still, their faces downcast. One of them, named Cleopas, asked him, "Are you only a visitor to Jerusalem and do not know the things that had happened there in these days?" "What things?" he asked. "About Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. "He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed, before God and all the people. The chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But he had hoped that he who was going to redeem Israel. And what is more, it is the third day since all this took place. In addition, some of our women amazed us. They went to the tomb early this morning, but didn't find his body. They came and told us that they had seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Then some of our companions went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but him they did not see. He said to them, "How foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Christ have to suffer these things and then enter his glory?" And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. As they approached the village to which they were going, Jesus acted as if he were going further. But they urged him strongly, "Stay with us, for it is nearly evening. The day is almost over." This is the word of the Lord.
What would it be like if you were to meet the risen Jesus? What would happen? What would it feel like? Would it be flashes of lightning, peals of thunder, trembling of the earth, unavoidable obviousness that God was doing something? Would it be such a moving in your heart that you could have no doubt whatsoever that the living God was encountering you? Or is it possible that actually you wouldn't even notice? For these two disciples on the road to Emmaus, they didn't realise at all. They were walking 7 miles, that's about 2 hours walk. I'm not going to walk quite that amount of time now while talking to you. It would take you too long to listen to it. But in all that time, in 2 hours of walking and talking and intense discussion and debate, it didn't actually cross their minds that this person who they were talking to as they walked along was the risen Jesus. St. Paul, of course, had blinding, flashing light that rendered him blind for some considerable while. Pause while I walk past the machinery. But then Paul wasn't exactly listening to God, was he? God needed to stamp and shout a bit to get his attention. My perception of the way that God works, the way that God operates, is that God goes for subtle if he possibly can. It wasn't working with Paul. He had to take extreme measures. But for us, actually, well, maybe we've met the risen Jesus. Maybe we've walked along the road and talked to him. Maybe we've sat next to him on a bus. Who knows? Because I think it's quite possible that God might come to us to deliver the message that he needs to deliver to us, the understanding, the inspiration, the prompt, the nudge, whatever it is, without us ever realizing that it was God that we'd met. And it doesn't matter if we didn't notice, because I'm guessing that God's quite happy to sit in the background and just reach us at the right moment. I'm home.
reading is taken from Luke 24, verses 28 to 35. As they approached the village to which they were going, Jesus acted as if he were going further. But they urged him strongly, "Stay with us, for it's nearly evening. The day is almost over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, gave thanks, broke it, and began to give it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he disappeared from their sight. They asked each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scripture to us?" They got up and returned at once to Jerusalem. There they found the 11 and those with them, assembled together and saying, "It is true, the Lord has risen and has appeared to Simon." Then the two told what had happened on the way and how Jesus was recognized by them when he broke the bread.
Christ walked with his disciples. He got to the point where he pretended to be going on, and they asked him. I must say it's interesting there because they strongly persuaded him to stay with them. If this was a test, that must be good, I would say. But what I must point out is that God is waiting to be invited into our lives. We make the decision for God to come into our lives. So when God comes into our lives, how do we know that God is in our lives? What are the things that actually trigger those? Sometimes we say, "Oh, I am waiting for God to do something for me in my life." When do we know? Have you made the invitation? Now, the interesting bit is Jesus came in with them. They sat down for dinner. They still didn't know who he was. They have been with him before, walked around with him, gone to places with him. But one thing interesting happened. He took bread, break it, give it to them. Now, it says that their eyes were opened immediately. But it's interesting. Does it mean that what they have done opened their eyes? Or was it Jesus telling them that you have actually done what I was expecting you to do? But he vanished immediately after. Now, that is something, I guess, that we have to think about. Because he'd never hung around. But imagine how those people were feeling at that particular point. We walked with this guy all along. We sat down. But they reflected, if we remember in the passage, when they said, "Were our hearts not burning?" when he was actually quoting scriptures for us. I think that was really an interesting point in their lives, that they are searching themselves. They didn't sit down, they got up immediately and moved on. Because of what they did, going back to ask people to tell the other disciples that this is what has happened to them. Those disciples wrote about it. You and I are able to read about it and understand it and know what it is. But what we have to remember is that God is waiting for our invitation. We have to make the invitation. God, come into my life. Do help me with this. Because the one thing that we know is God doesn't hang around. He is quite purposeful in what he is doing. He gets us on the right track, and leaves us to get on with it. So when we are in making that question, what do I want in my life? Ask God to come in, because He will. And when He puts you on the right track, you will have to be the one to get on with it. Those disciples did what they did. So let us get on with it.
Let's gather all those prayers and all those thoughts and reflections together and say together Jesus' prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever and ever. Amen. That brings us towards the end of our worship for today. Thank you for your company, those of you who've been with me along the line. Thank you for joining us later on, those who have joined us later on. We've seen that Jesus comes to us very normally sometimes. He comes to us unobtrusively, not in a flashy, showy way, in fact, in such a way that we may not even realize that it's him. And we've also seen that we need to invite him in. And when we do invite him in, when we take that initiative to let him come in, then perhaps we will meet him eating and drinking. The early Christians certainly got that idea, and they got in the habit almost the following week. They got in the habit of meeting together and eating together and drinking together, always in the hope that Jesus would join them again. And that's why I've encouraged you to have something to eat and something to drink as we've shared this service. For my drink today, I thought this was somewhat appropriate in the circumstances. Actually, it's not Mexican lager inside. It's Neasden ale, brewed by Leo and myself a couple of weeks ago, just in a Mexican bottle. So I pour this out. It's not red wine, but it is a way of drinking and remembering that we encounter Jesus in the experience of food and drink as we gather for hospitality and friendship and familyness. Whoa, haven't poured that very carefully. Then we meet the risen Jesus. So if I can wade my way through the froth on top, and if you have a cup to hand, then join me in a toast to our risen Saviour, to Jesus, to life, and to God's great love for us. And may God bless you and keep you, and make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May he look kindly on you and give you peace this day and every day. May God bless you.